Kia ora, and welcome to the Niggly Nishcast. It's your boy, the Diggity Doo-Dah Doc, Mr. Pipside Panther, here in the garage with the Wobbly Wildcard to chat our way through some Kiwi sporting matters. You know the deal by now. Cha-cha to you for listening. We just recorded our little bit of a All Blacks kōrero on the Patreon podcast, so that is available for our patrons, and you are welcome to join the Patreon whānau as well. Hit up the links across all our stuff. We, on the menu, and you can sign up and subscribe to the email newsletter as well, delivered on Mondays and Fridays, where we type some Kiwi sporting matters into your email. Pretty cool stuff. And we have the website where we serve up a plethora of reading things revolving around Kiwi sport. Pretty busy times at the moment. We got Plunket. Shield Cricket has just started up, so we'll chat with the Wildcard about the opening round of Plunket Shield Cricket. Obviously, NRL Grand Final this weekend. Melbourne Storm were too good for the Canberra Raiders, and the Penny Panthers were too good for the Rabbitohs. So we'll do a big old little preview of that from our Aotearoa perspective. We have some football matters to discuss as well, and who knows where this conversation might go. Let's start it up though. Wobbly Wildcard, how are you going?
Mate, I'm doing lovely. I've got the usual setup here at my desk where I've got my laptop, got my microphone, got my phone in front of me with the Plunket Shield live score updates, and then I got my old laptop, which normally doesn't work too well, but by uninstalling basically everything and only ever using it occasionally as like a backup TV, I've managed to get some use out of it sometimes. Currently got the Kansas City Chiefs vs Buffalo Bills streaming on that one while I record on the other one. So pretty well sorted at the moment, thanks to the wonders of modern technology, which is actually something I've been thinking about a bit recently, because trying to think ahead about the old the Spark Sport Cricket kind of new era of streaming sports in New Zealand that's coming along, and with the start of the summer of cricket now, with the Plunket Shield starting this week too, and it just got me thinking about how kind of amazing the access that we have to so much sport at the click of a finger, basically, or at least the click of a mouse, or touchpad, or etc. etc. It really is crazy times that we live in to be able to do all this. It's amazing. It's just taking a moment of gratitude for the times that we live in.
Yes, always revert back to the gratitude, and I was going to say, this doesn't really apply to the gratitude, but it's also if you, to know what's happening in sports right now, you need to have that click of the mouse access. So it's when you think about a bigger picture, the stuff you're able to watch sports wise, that's why. So I think far out, sports has blown up as far as just its place in society. And obviously a lot of that has to do with access to it. And it's no surprise when you think over the last 100 years where the journey that sport has been on, it kind of just follows the greater access, moving through the radio, then the TV, then the internet and stuff like that, and just being able to watch very niche sport as well as the high profile big dog sport rather easily. Not too many complications other than time, I guess.
Time's definitely the big one.
What is, obviously Plunket Shield Cricket, this is day 2. We are recording this on the morning of day 2, Tuesday morning. So day 2 for Wellington versus Canterbury, day 2 for Northern Districts versus Central Stags, day 1 for Auckland Aces versus Otago Volts. And at the time of recording, Auckland Aces are shitting all over the Otago Volts with their new ball. But it's not so much about performances just here, Wildcard, because the timing does get a bit niggly again. Shout out to time. You never got enough of it, and then it's got to be the right time as well. There you go. Bit of insights on time that I wouldn't say I've looked into time a whole lot, but nonetheless, shout out to time. So we can't really talk about big old performances, but just looking at the scorecards, wildcard, what is, just scorecard check. I think this is a fairly common practice and something that we can connect with the listeners on is just scorecard check. You check the scorecard, what are you looking for? Right now we're looking for team selections and different spots for different players. What stood out for you as you scanned the scorecards yesterday morning to see what was happening as far as team selection goes, and this morning when you checked the Auckland Aces scorecard as well?
Well, two things in particular. The first one is, last week we made little predictions about at the end of the podcast we're let's name one thing that we're going to guarantee is going to happen in this first round. And I think what did I say? Matt Henry was going to get 5 for, or did I say only 4? I can't remember if I hedged my bets or not. I also chucked in the added one that just to be a bit safer with that whoever bats first in that Wellington-Canterbury game is going to get skittled for less than 200, and Wellington are currently 64 for 7, so I think I've done all right there. Matt Henry's got 3 of them, so that is one thing I've been keeping an eye on. But I think the overwhelming thing is something I wrote about a little bit in the email yesterday as well, which is the situation with Tom Blundell, where you've got a dude who has been the test opener for how many? I think the last 4 tests, I think it is, and he has done a pretty good job of it. He's obviously got that famous 100. I think he got another 50 in his most recent one. A couple 2 or 3 scores of a 30 odd in there as well. Averaging over 40 in his admittedly short sample size as an opener, but that's pretty good. That's still a very, very good effort. You look at the fella, and I've said this before on previous podcasts that I didn't really see him as anything more than a stopgap. I think there is the theory out there, beyond my wild reckons as well, where he fiddles a little bit outside the off stump. He scores overwhelmingly through the leg side. Maybe though it's not he had a lot of cross bat shots early on as well. He bats like a wicketkeeper, basically. It's not necessarily the skill set you would have in mind for a test match opener, but at the same time, me saying that is me theorizing, whereas the runs that he scored as a test match opener, that's not theorizing at all. That's fact. Those runs that he scored, he's got runs on the board. So it's an interesting one where it's at some point the Black Cap selectors do have to make a sort of judgment call on this, because they either say we trust these numbers and we he has done nothing to be dropped, we want to keep going with him. They also have for example, Devon Conway, who's maybe not really, I think ideally he'd be batting at 3, he wouldn't really be a test match opener, but that number 3 spot isn't going to be available in the Black Caps for a long time, so guts on that front. But he's out there trying to get in. There are other fellas Will Young's been waiting for several years trying to get his chance the test match arena. The Black Cap selectors sort of do have to at some point make that judgment call of whether it's not even at some point, it's in a month or so when they pick their squad to play against the West Indies are coming first, isn't it? Against the West Indies. So at that point, they have to say, is Tom Blundell because at this point there's been a long break. You're not going through any kind of idea about stopgaps or whatever is done at this point. You've had far too long to plan and prepare and whatever. So you either say, yes, he is our test match opener going forward, or you say, you've done a great job, Tommy. You're still our backup wicketkeeper. BJ Watling is 35 years old. He won't be around forever. Not in BJ Watling. He might well play another 5 years, though. Who knows? But maybe we just don't. We see someone else in this test match opener spot in the future. So that's the kind of the friskiness that they're dealing with coming into the Plunket Shield. So it's going to be interesting to see whether Tom Blundell therefore opened for Wellington, which he did, not only opening, but he's also He's also the full-time wicketkeeper for them, so it's a bit of a workload for the fella. Although maybe not, because he was out for 2 in the first innings and didn't look fantastic at that. But first game of the season, no one else is scoring any runs either. They've lost another one since. They see now they're 64 for 8. So just to see, like, obviously Tom Blundell, we know he had never opened before he did so for the Black Caps. Like, Wellington weren't going to chuck him in there. He has a comfortable role in the middle order, scoring like good runs coming in a more traditional wicketkeeper kind of batting role. The fact that he's opening suggests that the Black Cap selectors probably like tap on the shoulder. What do you reckon? We want to see this. He's pretty good, so you might as well like try. And that is going to be like, you can't make a judgment over one thing, but it's interesting. Like, that's going to be something to follow, because the Black Caps, I believe, are going to be available for the first 4 rounds. Like, it's a while until the international calendar comes around. Like, I think it's late November, because even once the West Indies get here, they got to do some quarantine. So basically everyone except for the guys who are over at the IPL, which I think there's 6 now, pretty much everyone else is going to be available for Plunket Shield for the first 4 rounds, like the first half of the Plunket Shield season. So that's definitely going to be an ongoing one that's gonna potentially define the rest of Tom Blundell's career, you could even argue. So a lot at stake, but also that's exactly what you want when you come into these, is like, you want to be playing for that, because being a test match opener is a big bloody deal. So whether you got thoughts on Tom Blundell or whether you got thoughts on other scoreboard watches that you got, I'll hand it back to you now.
Well, part of the Tom Blundell discussion is Jet Raval, and he is obviously opening for Northern Districts. So, you could have a situation where Jet Raval scores a truckload more runs than Tom Blundell in the first couple of games. What situation does that leave the Black Caps test opener job? Because there was a good interview on Cricinfo with Jet Raval, and he was talking about just through some of the the mental demons, and like, if you're out of form in cricket, it's basically all mental demons. There's maybe a bit of technique, but my opinion, your lack of technique probably comes from the mental demons. And, cricket's a pretty brutal sport mentally. And it just sounded like Giraval had, any instance where a player falls out of form, any sport, they have their period where they got to go away and reassess. Like, it just sounded like a nice situation that fit the classic sports yarn. And that has me pondering, like, Giraval could be in a nice little spot right now, mentally, with who he is, what he does as a cricketer. And I'll just chuck it out there, like, keep an eye on Giraval over these next few rounds, because he might add a bit of spice to that Tom Blundell situation that you're talking about. It makes sense, right? It makes sense for the Black Caps to say, Tom Blundell, you got to bat opening and wicket keep, because that's what he doesn't wicket keep for the test team, right? No, he does. And Tom Blundell and Tom Latham. No, BJ Watling.
No, he doesn't. That's why it's interesting, because he's basically...
Yeah. And BJ Watling's
a test keeper, yeah. And
he's not playing this first round.
So Tom Blundell's basically auditioning for 2 spots at once. He's being the backup keeper and he's being the opener.
So I don't know if the Black Caps would have put that prerogative on Wellington, because I'm looking at the Wellington Firebirds team, and as far as I'm just saying that the team that Wellington have, it's better for Blundell to be the opener. Now, of course, if he's not opening for the Black Caps, no one knows that Tom Blundell is an opener, because it's it was just a very strange occurrence. But if he is perhaps viewed as the best opener alongside Tom Latham in New Zealand, it just looks natural for him to be opening in this Wellington Firebirds team, especially considering they brought in Finn Allen from Auckland, who's a young batsman who everyone talks about. My opinion is that Finn Allen has scored a lot of runs against touring international teams, and that's what perks everyone up. That's what, he scored 100 against England. Well, it's not England, For starters, it's, whatever England want to serve up against the New Zealand A or New Zealand 11 team. But also Finn Allen has done less in the Plunket Shield than he has in those tour games. So he's a young batsman everyone's talking about as having similar talent, just a few pegs down the ladder as Rachin Ravindra, who many people view as one of the best cricketing prospects in Aotearoa. Finn Allen has to do some Plunket Shield stuff first before we get to that level, but he's a young player that Wellington picked up from Auckland, and they put him in the middle order for this first game, and if he's given time in the middle order, it just makes sense in their team context to open with Blundell. So all of that is to say I think it's more a matter of convenience than a direct order to Tom Blundell and the Wellington Firebirds that you need to open, which is interesting, very interesting. The other thing I wrote about this morning in my early notes was Kartene Clark getting a run at number 4 for the Northern Districts Knights. He's not quite like Henry Cooper, big dog prospect, averages 39 in first-class cricket, opening the batting. Maybe, depending on who you are, you might think he's a better opening prospect than Rachin Ravindra. Most people will have Ravindra ahead of Henry Cooper. Having been in the weeds a fair bit, I think that Henry Cooper's a bit underrated. He's from Whangarei, he plays for Northern District, so you obviously much prefer Henry Cooper over Rachin Ravindra, their wildcard. But the Kartene Clark is a low-key prospect who, I think the thing that I wrote about this morning was that, so he played all 3 of the final Plunket Shield games earlier this year. He didn't score big runs, but in his 6 innings, he had scores over 10, and then he had a 4 not out. So those aren't like, oh my God, he hit 3 centuries in a row. But if I'm trying to assess a young batsman playing his first 3 games of Plunket Shield cricket, and he looks pretty good, he gets a start in all those innings after I think he played Super Smash and Ford Trophy, maybe just Super Smash. But he looked good in coloured clothing for the Knights as well. So he's someone, and he's been put straight in, number 4, Colin de Grandhomme, number 5 for the Knights, and he's just someone to watch out for if you're like fully low-key underground domestic cricket nerd. Kartene Clark is maybe emerging with the Knights at the moment.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw him score a 50 against Auckland in the Ford Trophy last year, which was a pretty tidy innings. I'm pretty sure it was a Ford Trophy game. And he just I wouldn't say a lot of power to his game, but he milked the gaps really well, like lots of singles, not too many dot balls. Pretty busy kind of player. It was a tidy little innings. And I mean, for the same reason, I will have a little bit of a bias towards Henry Cooper, but I could, go down the line of if Tom Latham ever gets injured, I wouldn't have a problem with Cooper and Rachin Ravindra as a test match opening partnership in 5 to 10 years. It's they're both excellent prospects. We don't have to boost one up ahead of the other. It's Ravindra also is the dude who's batting with Tom Blundell, isn't he? So that's another little curious twist to the tale. Is Wellington are 65 for 9 now though, so they might need a bit more of these batting guys.
Any other notes you got here, Wildcard, just across the grounds? Anyone tickling your fancy as far as selection goes?
Not my fancy so much, but I might turn the question back on you with a few of these sort of like, have we got any, like, I see Ollie Pringle's debuting for Auckland today. Are there like many of those types of guys, like fresh on the scene, new names that we won't have heard of before that are emerging now at the week 1 of the new season?
Kartene Clark is the big one. he is someone that most people won't know, and the fact that he's just been chucked in number 4 straight away, round 1, is pretty cool. The other thing is that Will Somerville is playing as the spinner for Auckland Aces. Lewis Delport was amazing in the back end of last summer as a spinner when Will Somerville was injured, but Will Somerville straight back in. Sean Soley is listed to open for the Auckland Aces, which would be... Sean Soley has gone from being like his first few seasons, he was really good with the bat. Then last season, he was really good with the ball, and he was used more as a bowler, often batting way down the order, but used as a 3rd or 4th seamer. And I'm not sure if he will, but he is listed alongside Graham Beggan as an opener for the Auckland Aces. So that's just a weird journey for Sean Solier, but he is quite good at cricket. Bats, bowls, and does a bit of everything really well. Talks about Katane Clark with the Knights, Central District Stags. The big one here for me was Brad Schmullian selected. Obviously, Ajaz Patel is injured. So Brad Schmullian gets a look in there with his leggies as perhaps the lead spin option. Raymond Toole is a name that most people won't be familiar with. He played a couple of games last summer. Nothing too crazy in his efforts. Wellington Firebirds, everything's fairly settled. Same with the Canterbury team. Canterbury, very settled group with Daryl Mitchell just coming into the middle order as a recruit from the Knights. So everything's fairly settled. You mentioned the IPL. Lockie Ferguson was excellent. I think he played his first game and he took 3 wickets and he won a super over as well. So shout out Lockie Ferguson. Matt Henry's still doing, Trent Bolt, sorry. He's still doing some good things over there in the IPL. I'm not sure how much the other dudes have played. Obviously, Kane Williamson has been front and center for whatever team he plays as well. So we'll let these scorecards develop and we'll let the cricket play, and then we'll see what is in store for the next episode. The biggest thing is Tom Blundell right now, right? Wildcard, just the whole opening situation. That's what people with a wider cricket context around Aotearoa, just Tom Blundell opening for Wellington and playing as a wicketkeeper, as you alluded to. That's the big thing for the listeners to note down. Have you got any other of those like wider context things just with Black Caps that you want to chuck out there for the listeners? Daryl Mitchell made his test debut last summer. He's now playing with Canterbury. That's something that could have wider ramifications depending on how he goes. And that's the 2 big ones that come top of mind to me. Do you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, Blundell is definitely the overarching one, because if you're looking at the Plunket Shield to think specifically about Black Caps Test match context, then that's the one position that more than anything is sort of up in the air, and we've seen like a bit of intent there as well. Obviously, I think you're right in that the Black Caps wouldn't specifically say you gotta pick this guy as an opener, but they might like hint it, like, we would probably prefer you do. We're not gonna pick your team for you, but we would prefer it. And then obviously, regardless of that, Tom Blundell is gonna be saying, "Mate, I'm opening, okay? Like, I'm not even asking, I'm opening because I want to be in that test team playing as often as possible." And yeah, so that is the one that stands out. But at the same time, like, there's a couple other, seeing like some of the, I think Henry Nichols isn't playing, which is a pity because it would have been nice to see him. Hopefully he'll be back for second round, but he's a guy who's had a little run of scores without a 50 in test matches and would like to probably score a few runs against the red ball. Might get his chance later on. There's the obvious intrigue of just seeing guys like Neil Wagner and Company playing Plunket Shield. I mean, someone like Ish Sodhi's probably got a lot to play for after being top wicket taker a couple years ago and not being very good at all last year in this competition. There's while we're on the Black Caps thing as well, I mean, Matt Henry just took his 4th wicket. Wellington all out for 65, defending champs. Not a great start. But I saw also that if, like, Matt Henry is looking to get into the team, most likely the player he's competing with might well be Kyle Jamieson, who's also, I think, got 3 for 10 from his first spell for Auckland. So it's going to be probably for round 1. I mean, it just, like, weather has already affected every single one of these games to some degree, I think. It's likely to be a factor throughout. We might not get the results unless these wickets keep tumbling like this, but it looks like it's going to be round 1 at least is going to belong to the seam bowlers. And then also, of course, the Plunket Shield is just a worthy follow on its own merits, just as a competition itself, let alone the bigger implications. That's the word. The bigger implications of all of like individual performances and everything. It's just also a great, wholesome, wonderful competition that we put as much effort into supporting as anyone else does in the Kiwi media these days.
Let's slide into some football matters. You've maybe a similar premise here in the sense that we've got the local premiership starting up. Do you have a start date for that? When's the first game?
I can't remember. But ask me again in about 30 seconds and I'll tell you.
Next weekend? Weekend after?
No, not for about a month. The women's one starts at the end of the week. Not the end of the week, the end of the month. The women's one starts.
But, like, based on what's happening with... So you've got these competitions, right? You've got the Plunket Shield where you've got a team of cricketers trying to be the best and trying to win the competition. But these competitions serve as a... they're the foundation in Aotearoa for how we build our context and our understanding of the higher levels. So we talk about Plunket Shield, we talk about New Zealand cricket in that way, where you've got the aspect of, like, what's this gonna mean for the Black Caps, as well as this team is doing this really well, and here's a couple of really underground low-key players. Is there, like, using your, I don't know what's more pertinent to this discussion, whether it's the local premiership, whether it's Flying Kiwi stuff, whether it's Wellington Phoenix business matters that are happening at the moment. How do you kind of view those three things interrelating? So is there something in the premiership that's happening or that is set up to happen that could have ramifications for the Phoenix? Is there some Phoenix business that is going to have ramifications further up the pecking order, as we've seen with, Sarpreet Singh going to Bayern Munich, Liberto Kakache going to Europe as well? How do you kind of, like, just fresh off this Plunket Shield discussion where we've kind of attacked it from the different angles, is that something that can apply to football discussion? Obviously, the easy bridge here is to cross over to the Premiership and then layer it up from the Premiership. I'm just curious, as like a framework for that discussion, how do you, like, what do you reckon?
Yeah, 14th and 15th of November is the first weekend when the Premiership begins. I would agree. There's a lot of similarities to how we were sort of talking about the Plunket Shield to the Premierships. Maybe with just a couple extra steps in between, like, because the Plunket Shield, you perform well there, that's the next step up is the Black Caps Test squad. That's not really the case with, like, doing well at the Premiership and going straight into the All Whites. It's more like doing well in the Premiership sets you up to go professionally somewhere else, and then you're probably looking at coming into the All Whites. Sometimes you got players who have been over pro come back to play some Premi stuff, and then, maybe they're all existing All Whites, or they make the All Whites there on promise of, like, what they're going on to achieve, and etc. Like, it's players do get picked out of the Premiership now and then. If everyone is available, the All Whites are picking a fully professional squad. Especially now, like, so even just since the last All White squad was picked about a year ago, like, there's that many more players now playing professionally. So, it's not a direct link, despite the old "where all whites are made" tag that they used to use for I haven't seen it this season. I'm not sure if they're still doing that for the New Zealand football's promotions of the league and all that. A little bit that's more true in the women's side of things. The women's premiership is a little bit more of a feeder to the football ferns, and then often it's a bit different these days where there's just more open pathways because there's more professionalism around women's football around the world. But certainly over the last 10 years, it's sort of been you do well domestically, and also for especially for New Zealand youth teams, and then from there you use that experience to promote yourself to clubs around the place and highlight reels from under 20 World Cups or whatever and that kind of thing. So a little bit more true for the women's premiership than it is for the men's premiership, but that doesn't mean it's not the same direct pathway. It just means there's a couple other stop-offs you got to go along the way, stop for petrol and play professional football, and then maybe have a bit of dinner on the way later on with another professional contract. And then you're looking at the All Whites or, the final destination type of thing, which, puts the premiership in a... This is why the squad lists are always... When we're slowly getting to the point where we're going to start getting them very soon, I hope. Teams are into preseason now. We'll hopefully get announcements imminently on what the squads look like, but that's almost the most exciting part of the season for me, is just seeing the squads and seeing the players. Which names do I recognize? Which former professionals are back over playing, looking to give their career a little boost before they have another swing at things. Who is the players from the age grade national teams who are getting a chance here, the next guys coming through. Because remember, most of these, you talk about, the two guys you mentioned were Kakache and Sarpreet Singh. Both came through the Wellington Phoenix Academy, but for example, the first time I ever saw Libby Kakache play, he was playing centre back for the Wellington Phoenix reserves team, which actually wasn't even that long before he cracked the first team. It was such a rapid rise that dude had. Callum McCower was a Golden Boot winner in the Premiership. Elijah Just, who and Dalton Wilkins, all three of those dudes, three Musketeers, all playing for the same team in Denmark at the moment. Some pain for going to the Phoenix as well. There's all four of those dudes were from that Eastern Suburbs team. Andre de Jong is playing in South Africa. Mike Evans actually just signed in South Africa this week, leaving Auckland City there. So the pathways are most definitely there, and it's just it's just a little bit more of a, I don't know, I guess you could call it a hipster vibe or something. You're getting in on the you're catching the same train to the same destination. You're just getting on a couple stops earlier, I think, with the Premiership.
So you mentioned a lot of really interesting names here, a lot of the younger crop, and you also mentioned that the full kind of squads haven't been announced. But do you have an early feeling? So and as you said, there's different journeys. So this is kind of there's a lot of questions coming at you hard and fast here. Are there players who you can see as players potentially capable of playing for the Wellington Phoenix? Are there players, do you have any names of players who... So maybe it's about, are there young players who you view as, A-League talents? So these players might play for the Phoenix. Not, just solely, but their next step, they have the ability to play for the Wellington Phoenix and or play in the A-League. Then there are going to be players who are better suited to go straight from good Premiership performances to sealing an overseas contract, whether it be through the connection with America, whether it be through the connection with some of these clubs and leagues that have multiple Kiwis in them. Is that I think that's the easiest way to organize some of the talent that we're talking about here. So can you separate those? Are there prospects coming through the local football scene, kind of off the top of your head? Because as you said, you don't have the squads in front of you. But are there players that you view in your assessment of the Kiwi footballing landscape that maybe people should watch out for this summer, just with that understanding or background information that this player has shown to this point that they may have the ability to go play A-League, or they may have the ability to pick up an overseas contract.
Yeah, I think the separation there is probably about Phoenix versus overseas, because there's not so much the talent levels, because say first of all, undeniably there's a heap of players that fit into all those categories. I'd struggle to roll through names without bringing up squad lists from last year or whatever. I think it sounds like every team that's had anything to say about these kind of things, like Auckland City, there was an interview with Jose Figueira, the manager. I've seen Team Wellington had a little press release thing on their website today about their sort of little team meeting to kick things off, and other hints that I've heard but not had actual send names or photos or anything to confirm things. It just sounds like there is going to be a lot of continuity between last season and this season. There's not a lot of, obviously, import players are going to be extremely difficult to get. There might just not be any other than the permanent residents, of which there will be a few. A lot of those guys do live permanently. Auckland City have got a few who aren't New Zealand citizens but live here, so that no dramas there. There will still be imports in the league, just not to the level that we normally see, and that leaves a few extra gaps probably for some of these other talented local fellas who might have something to offer, which will be well, this is why I wanted to make that sort of Phoenix versus overseas distinction, because I think the difference there is that the Phoenix, you look at the state, they just released Brandon Wilson as well this week. That was a little bit unexpected that he was under contract for this year, came in mid-season last year, was sort of a backup midfielder, did pretty well in the games that he played, would have continued to be a backup even though Matty Steinman wasn't going to come back. Still would have been behind Cam Devlin and Alex Rufer, but he has, for personal reasons, been released to go back to his home in Perth. Unsurprisingly, within the day, there were reports that he's going to sign with Perth Glory, so I sort of didn't expect him to leave without also having another deal in place. But it's you're not going to tell a fella he can't go home in 2020 with everything that's going on, so fair enough. And he was a backup player, so but it's just another player that the Phoenix will need replacing is the thing. And I had it on the last email, but I think they're at 11 players now under contract. There's about 4 or 5 who are free agents off contract, but who haven't signed anywhere else. So there's a good chance they'll come back. Guys like Te Arawhai Hudson Wihongi will be shocked if he doesn't re-sign. That kind of situation. But yeah, they need a fair bit more depth. And in recent times, one of the places where the Phoenix have, thankfully as well, gone to find a lot of that depth has been the Premiership. Tim Payne is an example of someone who came and did very well. Hudson Wihongi himself. Callum McCowart as well was coming out of the Premiership when he signed. Callan Elliott is another one. And not to mention anyone who comes through their academy team is playing Premiership football for the reserves as well, against all at the same level. So it is a league where they've had a pretty high success rate in the last couple of years as well. So it shows that the guys are there. One rumor I seem to be seeing at the moment is Clayton Lewis potentially signing with the Phoenix, which would be not entirely sure where he'd fit into the squad, but I guess he'd have to be a central midfielder in the sort of in that sort of Cam Devlin type role. But we'll see how it goes. Maybe he'd play, I don't know. But still a good signing, a guy who's played professionally before, got the talent, got the ability to, and the desire and all those things, looking for that big break. This could be that big break, and it's very cool to see the Phoenix offering that kind of thing. However, the Phoenix do sort of also, they're not in a position where they can take on project players. They already have a whole academy team of those types. So with the Phoenix, they're looking a bit more for those kind of ready-to-go guys. Whereas, for example, 2 guys that spring to mind, who both coming out of Ole Academy, both played for Team Wellington, but not a whole lot last season. Matt Garbett played, I think, only a couple times off the bench for Team Wellington, and then went on to sign with Falkenbergs in the Swedish top flight, where he's played about a dozen times this season. And he's I think 18 years old now. He's playing top flight footy in Sweden is a hell of an achievement and a fair bit of a step up from the Premiership. But like, it just goes to show how quickly the rise can be. But also he's in a situation where he's training professionally every day at the moment. He'll be progressing so quickly just from that alone, the environment that he's in, the professional environment. And also a team like Valkenburg's can be a little bit more sort of discerning with players and saying like, we'll sign you for a couple of years. We don't expect you to come in immediately and be a big impact. Marko Stamenic is the other one that came to mind. He did play sort of a run of games in the middle of the season for Team Wellington, scored a goal or two as well from memory and did like very well, like showed why he's one of the top midfield prospects coming out of the country. He has since signed with Copenhagen and Denmark and won the Youth Cup, scoring in the final with them 3 or so weeks ago. He's apparently been promoted to train with the first team now, like he's on a steady rise there. It's but that kind of signing is different to the kind, like those aren't the kind of players the Phoenix would be looking to sign necessarily, because those guys themselves have higher aspirations. Unless they wanted to do like the Callum McCowart thing of taking that year to play for the Phoenix, work your way up, steady yourself a bit more, and then go on to Europe after that, sort of as a stepping stone kind of thing. But so that's, long story short, that's sort of how I would categorize, like that's how I would separate the categories, I think, from the Premiership guys. But the other part of that is you don't know. Like sometimes the right player for the right club isn't necessarily going to be like the 19-year-old wonder kid coming through. It might be a 28-year-old or something who they just like, when Dan Morgan signed in South Africa, for example, he's not necessarily the first fullback I would have thought, but just with his experience and whatever, he seemed to fit in quite nicely. And the particular, like, he was always a very underrated player too, Dan Morgan, but yeah, like he's done pretty well, starting more games than not in the South Africa last season. South Africa's actually a funny one because probably the last thing to say on this is like South Africa in particular, for some reason, well, it's not some reason. I think it's because Jeremy Brockie went over there and did very well, sort of made a name for New Zealand players over in that league. He's not the first guy to go like to play professionally in South Africa from New Zealand, but he was probably the most successful. And then after that, like, Emiliano Tade goes over there, Michael Lealifa goes over there, not New Zealanders, but guys who were coming out of Auckland City in particular, I suppose, is probably the link there. Maya Bevan now has gone over there, Dan Morgan as well, who I've mentioned, like he's another Auckland City dude. Andre De Jong is currently over there. Morgan, De Jong and Bevan will be the three guys there this upcoming season, which starts, I think it starts next week, in fact. So, for like the Phoenix are out there, hopefully looking through the Premiership for a couple hardy battlers that can improve their stocks for next season. For whatever reason, the South African Premier Soccer League as well seems to like a Premiership signing or two as well. So, there's fans all over the world, many continents.
It's all about that access, an international audience, one click away. Just watch a bit of tape on their local Premiership in Aotearoa. Wonder why there's a dog taking a shit on the pitch, and but that's a good little
all-time classic moment.
Definitely an all-time classic moment. I'm interested. This is maybe where we can park our bums for a bit of Flying Kiwis discussion. Let's stick with South Africa. So, the footballing world is a pretty weird world. Like, you think about all the different players that come to New Zealand to play football. Players from South America, obviously, if you're from England and you come to New Zealand to play football, straight away, first 11. Same thing if you're a Latino even. There's the South African connection to Kiwi football has been an interesting one to sit back and watch over the last few years. You mentioned a bunch of names there, but we also have like a large South African population base in New Zealand, South African Kiwis, obviously, as seen in the cricketing sphere. So I'm just kind of walking through this in my mind, and you can pick up on any of these things as you wish. Someone like Ryan de Vries, it's weird how he's got the South African connection, but he's not playing in South Africa to the best of my knowledge. I think he was playing in, for some reason I looked him up a couple months ago, and he was somewhere in Asia, or he spent time in Asia and in Europe and stuff like that. So it's on the first thing.
He played in Japan for a while, and he's currently playing and even scoring a couple goals in the Irish Premier League with Sligo Rovers.
There you go. So that was like a point on the personnel. There seems to be a weird mix of personnel going to South Africa. As you mentioned, a couple of the players who came to New Zealand to play local premiership, they're along with a little crop of young, talented Kiwis are over there. Obviously, going back a few years, it started with the Jeremy Brocky wave. So you got the first bit, personnel. There's no real rhyme or reason in the personnel department from my perspective. That's what I'm asking you. And then from there, is it more money? Because all I hear is that the South African rand is terrible. So that's why a lot of the South African cricketers are going to play overseas. All those cricketers who come to New Zealand do so for a reason. One might be security. The other is the financial stability of the country. And then you get into pathway to the top of your sport in either country. Same thing in England. A lot of players give up their South African eligibility to go play in England, play county cricket, and they are willing to sacrifice international cricket for South Africa for the stability that county cricket offers. Next level is the rugby. A lot of players from South Africa are very quick to venture out of South Africa, to a lesser extent of the cricketers, but it's also, these are both examples that there's like a financial decision made to get out of South Africa. Obviously, security is a big one as well. So I'm wondering, with little rhyme or reason around the personnel going to South Africa to play football, from there, are these South African clubs super well funded that they can't be super well funded if they're relying on Kiwis to play football, but is it like their offers to these Kiwi footballers are better? Obviously, you don't know the strict finances, but are they financially, to get you to go to South Africa, it's got to be a pretty good deal, I'll assume. So you got weird personnel aspects. I'm wondering, is it a financial decision? Is it a footballing decision? Is there some secret source in South African football? Like, how do you assess the rise of South Africa as a destination for Kiwi footballers in those categories? Personnel, no rhyme or reason, bit scattered with who is going there. Like, is there some financial mechanism that makes it beneficial? Is there some footballing mechanism that makes it beneficial?
I forgot to mention as well, Michael Boxall was another one who's played some time over there. He was at Super Sport with Jeremy Brocky when the two of them were both at their best there. Probably the two best players we've had in South Africa, certainly in recent years. I wouldn't say there's no rhyme or reason. I think the fact that a lot of, like, 2/3 or so of these guys, probably more, because Boxall briefly had some time with Auckland City too. I think Auckland City are a big factor, and I wouldn't be surprised if Auckland City, like, they're a lot more prominent than any other premiership club because of the Club World Cup spotlight they've had on them. I wouldn't be surprised if that's a factor, because South African clubs have competed in that tournament, like representing Africa before. I think the Mamelodi Sundowns have won like the African Champions League in the past. It's the team that Jeremy Brocky moved to after he got successful in South Africa and then promptly stopped being successful at a horrible time of it there, being played out of position and not really getting opportunities, etc., etc. So by all accounts, I know this is true, Jeremy Brocky's actually back in Australia now, where his wife is from. would be interested to see if he sneaks an A-League contract with one of those Aussie clubs next season, actually. That wouldn't put that out of the question. I also wouldn't be surprised if he just decided to retire. Like, he's a family man, he's got other things in his life. But see how it goes. Hopefully there's an A-League deal in there for him. So I think there is some rhyme to it. But I think as far as the players goes, choosing to move to South Africa, I think money's got nothing to do with it. I think the standard of play doesn't really have anything to do with it. The top few clubs in South Africa are quite good, but mostly the guys who go over there from the Premiership they were talking about are going to mid-table teams at best. Team Maya Bevan just signed for, just got promoted. The team Andre de Jong's been playing for only just avoided being relegated last season. Dan Morgan's team, which was the same team Micah Lealifa signed for, actually did really well, but failed on the chance. Like, they had an outside chance of making not the Champions League, but the next tier down, so the African equivalent of the Europa League, which when Jeremy Brockie was with Supersport, I think they made the final of that while he was there, and he was top scorer, but didn't win the trophy, unfortunately. But then Maritzburg came back after the restart, after the extended pandemic break, and were not very good after that, kind of phoned in the rest of the season, so they slipped back into the mid-tables. But yeah, the overwhelming reason why these guys are going over there, I think, is just opportunity. Like, it's just the fact that here is a professional league which is skipping out some of the stops on that train journey we were talking about earlier. Like, you don't have to go and play like third, fourth tier in Sweden, working your way up, getting some highlight videos, finding like an agent over there with some connections. Like, South Africa is just going direct to the Premiership and saying, we'll sign a couple of these dudes. And it's not it's not like there's 20 or 30 guys all going over there. Like, there'll be 3 probably in the next season. Over the last 5 years, there've probably been about 7 or 8 entirely. But for New Zealand football, and considering all these guys except Brockie and Boxall had come through the had signed from out of the Premiership. Those guys had played Premiership in the past, but gone way back a while. So that is, I just think it's all opportunities. Like, guys want to be professional footballers. They're doing Emiliano Tade did, and then he didn't. Like, he actually left because he decided he didn't want to be a professional footballer. It wasn't worth the lifestyle for him, where he was away from his family who were living in New Zealand now. Like, he's lives here permanently, and he wanted to get back, so he came back and played for Auckland City instead. So yeah, I think it's as simple as that. Like, there is a decent, it's nothing like it is with cricket, the connect, South African connection with the national team, but there is some, Declan Wynn is of South African descent. There's Storm Roux as well. There's a couple of them, but these are guys who came over with their families when they were kids. It's not like the Devon Conway, Neil Wagner type thing where they were already first class cricketers when they moved over here. It's a little bit of a different situation. I think it's also, without opening a whole other can of worms, I think there's also a probably worth saying, the difference between cricket and football in South Africa is pretty stark on a racial perspective. So probably got to say that not so many opportunities as well for South African footballers outside of South Africa, in the same way that just because of the nature of everything that their country's been through. Football is an overwhelmingly black sport in South Africa, which means it's huge with the population, which means that there is a fair bit of money in it, but it's not necessarily money that's evenly spread around. It's also, so we're not going to get into South African racial politics any more than that, though. It's obviously a tricky one, but that is a factor, I suppose, in all this as well, where, how much is it right? Without casting judgments or whatever, a lot of white South African families move to places like New Zealand and Australia at the time that apartheid was ending. Like, I'll just leave it at that point. That's not really a coincidence.
But then all these players from New Zealand are going to South Africa. So like it's a weird thing because we view South Africans, or I view South Africans from a sporting lens as being suppliers of so much sporting talent around the world. And then in this one little pocket of Kiwi sport, there's Kiwis going to South Africa, and off the top of my head, not too many people are going to South Africa to play sport. Like, no one's going from New Zealand to South Africa to step up their cricket abilities for like a little training block. Like, I'm going to go 2 years in South Africa and I'm going to end up a much better player. You know, like, it's just a weird crossover where for some reason there's this little pocket of Kiwi football that seems to go really well in South Africa.
Well, I mean, at the moment, the Black Caps are better than South Africa at cricket, so you wouldn't do that. Like, New Zealand at the moment has the better pathways, arguably. Probably not the depth of talent, because South Africa's got a much bigger population. I don't know. I don't think the fact that there are some notable South African heritage players in the All Whites has anything to do with this little trend, though. I think that's just like lifestyle moves. Families came over here when they were young, not like connected in any way. Of just, I don't know. The South African Premier Soccer League, I don't know enough about its place.
But that's kind of the point. That's the point, is that you've got some footballers who go from South Africa to New Zealand to completely flip their lifestyle around and in search of better pathways.
But not for
But then you've got
reasons.
Kiwi footballers with no connection to South Africa going to South Africa. So it's a very strange, mix.
I guess it's one of those bargain hunting things from the PSL's point of view. Like, they're obviously not going to sign English Premier League players, are they? Like, they're not at that level. As you say, South Africa maybe isn't really a destination for professional. I'm sure there'll be a bunch of Brazilians, because there's Brazilians in every league around the world. But like, for the most part, what you see is a league that's full mostly of domestic players. South Africans, like, it's largely a South African playing base. You do get a lot of like Zimbabweans, a few Kenyans, like, neighboring nations as well. But probably, and also I think it seems South Africa in a way does seem like it's maybe disconnected from a lot of the other African playing base, sort of strength and power kind of hubs. I mean, like, those, think about like the strong, dominant nations at like international level, like Nigeria, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, countries like that. I mean, all the French-speaking ones, those players just go to France. Like, it's the easiest pathway to professional football there. Like, a lot of them go, like, a lot of Nigerians playing in England, a few in Scandinavia, like, countries around Europe. Maybe South Africa just geographically gets left off the bus there a bit. I don't know. And I suppose if they're just looking for talent, where do you find it outside the box? I mean, obviously everyone's got a bunch of like top-notch South African players, but where do you find that extra talent? Like, if everyone's got that access to that playing base, where can you find something that sets you apart? Maybe that's it. Like, they've just got to take a few more gambles on lesser leagues, and it might just be as simple as a couple New Zealanders did well, therefore, maybe we can find, like, I even in a news article I was reading about Maya Bevan, they referred to him as the new Brocky. Like, he hasn't even played a game in South Africa yet. They're already comparing him to Jeremy Brocky just because he's a New Zealand striker. So I think, honestly, it might just be as simple as that. Like, everyone just follows the trends. That was the Patreon bit, we're talking about that, where people have followed like certain trends the All Blacks have done to be successful. Everyone else tries to do the same thing. It might honestly just be as simple as that with this little trend where, like, a couple New Zealanders have done well, so it's just one of the places that teams look. And then the same agent might be like, well, I sold you this dude, and he did pretty well for you, so why don't you have a look at these three players? You want to bring any of them over for a trial or whatever? I've got more where this came from. A lot of opportunism probably involved. Football transfers just seems like a massively shady business in general, so I wouldn't put it past anyone involved.
So Caleb Clark's the new Jonah Lomu, and Maya Bevan's the new Jeremy Brocky. Big it up, big it up, big it up.
That's it.
That's the one. That's the one. All right, Wildcard. We'll move into some rugby league matters, and we've got the Melbourne Storm versus Penrith Panthers. Big thing for the Penrith Panthers Wildcard, and I'll write about this in my preview. So if you want to read more about James Fisher-Harris and what a fucking monster this dude is, stay tuned to the rugby league pages of the Niche Case, as there'll be a fair bit of celebration for the dudes in the grand final, a little bit of grand final preparations. James Fisher-Harris, 55 minutes, 18 runs, 197 metres. So that's well over 10 metres per run. And that's a key idea here, Wildcard. 10 metres per run. And he also just made 36 tackles at 90%. So James Fisher-Harris has been doing this all season long. Another Northlander, so you've got Henry Cooper in the Plunket Shield doing some Northland things. You've got James Fisher-Harris doing some rugby league things from the Hokianga. And Fisher-Harris has been doing this all season long. He has played 22 games this season. He is tackling at 91.5% efficiency. And he averages 180 run meters per game. So he averages 180 run meters per game. And in the two finals games that he's played, Roosters and Rabbitohs, he's played 56 minutes, then 55 minutes. That's fairly similar. And he had 123 meters against the Roosters, which off the top of my head was around that 10 meters per run mark. And then he had the 197 meters against the Rabbitohs. And James Fisher-Harris, let me just scroll through here. He has played 22 games, and 20 of them James Fisher-Harris has run for, 19 of them he's run for more than 150 meters. And the 3 games he did not reach 150 meters in a game, they were consecutive games. I'm not sure what the triplet version of consecutive is, but round 19, round 20, and then round 21 against the Roosters, all 3 of those games he ran for less than 150 meters, but they were the only games of the whole season with less than 150 meters. So point being, James Fisher-Harris is really, really good at rugby league, and he is a key figure in that Penrith Panthers forward pack. James Fisher-Harris, here's some more just housekeeping. He made his debut in 2016. So he's played, this is his 5th season of NRL footy. And how old is he? Like 24? 24. He's exactly 24 years old. 5 seasons. And 4 of those seasons he's played over 20 games. 2017 he only played 15 games. But he's played 23 games, 15 games, 25 games, 24 games, 22 games. And if you're in the NRL and you're playing 20 games a season over a long period of time, that is very well done. Hats off to you. Shout out to you. Big cheers. But my question, Wildcard, to you, sir. Melbourne Storm forwards. What do we have? We got Jesse Bromwich, Kenny Bromwich, Nelson Asafa-Solomona, Brandon Smith. Heck, I can extrapolate this out to every single Melbourne Storm forward. So we're including Christian Welch. We're including Felice Kafusi. We have Tino Fa'asua-Malaawi. We've got Dale Finucane. The whole Melbourne Storm forward pack wildcard. 1 forward averaged 10 meters per run. So all these forwards Jesse Bromwich, Christian Welch, Felice Kafusi, Kenny Bromwich, Nelson Asafa Solomona, Brandon Smith, Tino Fa'asua Malaawi, and Dale Finucane. All of those forwards, most, if not all, have played international or origin footy. One of them averaged 10 metres per run. Who was it? So 10 metres per run or more, or better. So maybe 15 metres per run, maybe 13 metres per run. But one of those forwards averaged at least 10 metres per run. Who was it?
I'm trying to think now. Is who was? I'm trying to picture that game, and I'm just seeing like the Storm shifting the ball and running it out wide, and bloody Peppenhausen running through, and I will. Oh, I don't know. Let's go with the tried and true and say Jesse Bromwich.
It's Brandon Smith.
Brandon Smith. I was tempted to say that.
Brandon Smith. He had eight runs for 80 metres off the bench in his lock forward, middle forward role. Remember that Brandon Smith is the New Zealand Kiwis hooker, and he has been for the past, he's played like 8 international tests. So for basically 2 years now, Brandon Smith has been the international Kiwis hooker, playing as a middle forward, and he was the only Melbourne Storm forward to average 10 metres per run. Like Christian Welch had a barnstormer, but he had 13 runs for 119 metres. Jesse Bromwich had 12 runs for 99 metres. So this, shout out to Brandon Smith, because that's what he does every game. And we've talked a lot about it. We talk a lot about the Melbourne Storm, and I just thought that was a nice little bit of trivia. But I got to that point, wildcard, because I was checking their stats and like to tweet out a few good stats from NRL players, especially the Kiwi NRL players. But it's hard to tweet out the stats when they don't they're not eye-catching. And they don't, like that 10 metre per run mark, like Jesse Bromwich, 12 runs for 99 metres. That's not anything amazing, right? That's not like, oh my God, Jesse Bromwich, world-class middle forward, one of the best props in the game. That's not what you think when you see Jesse Bromwich's stats. So, and I think that's what applies for the whole Melbourne Storm forward pack, because I'm not sure if you saw the game against the Raiders, but you alluded to it there, wildcard. Going back to the All Blacks and thinking like, okay, so the Wallabies miss a lot of tackles, and apparently that's why they lost against the All Blacks. But what are the All Blacks doing to make the Wallabies miss those tackles? It's the same process with the Melbourne Storm forwards in my mind, where I'm going, okay, so the Melbourne Storm absolutely dominate the Canberra Raiders, but there's nothing to say about the forwards from a standard procedure measurement standpoint. I'm still trying to figure out what makes Jesse Bromwich so good, because it's very hard. It's a lot easier if the stats reinforce it. So it's very easy for me to highlight how good James Fisher-Harris is, because I can dice, flip, chop the stats any which way, and they're always going to make for pretty good reading. But some of what the Melbourne Storm forwards dish up, it doesn't lend itself to easily assessing their abilities or what they do so well. So that's like the starting point from which you have to start thinking deeper about their role and the team and style of play. And what the Melbourne Storm did against the Canberra Raiders is they went to their edges. So then you start to think, okay, well, what role does Jesse Bromwich and Christian Welch, what are they doing if the Melbourne Storm are attacking down at the edges with such vigor? You get the footy. You're just trying to get the footy to Josh Adokar in space. You're just trying to get the footy to Suliasi Vunivalu, let alone the kicking game that was expertly deployed against the Canberra Raiders. A lot of kicks in behind the defensive line on either side of the field. So you've got a Melbourne Storm team who are kind of, against the Raiders, they played like around the forward pack. And that comes from a lot of shifting of the footy. So both Christian Welch and Jesse Bromwich, they had 4 passes each. Kenny Bromwich had 4 passes. Felice Kafusi had 3 passes. So you're looking at 12, 15 passes between 4 starting forwards. Nelson Asafa-Solomona, he had no passes. But that's not his job. His job is to, you might need to take a serious hit-up, and they did take their hit-ups. They did their job for their team. But it's also, okay, your job in this play is to run the decoy, and Christian Welch is going to be passing the footy out the back to Cameron Munster. Jesse Bromwich is going to be passing the ball to Jerome Hughes. And it's just an interesting paradigm because you're coming up against the Penrith Panthers team who lay everything out. You can see what they're doing in the stats. You can see really good stats for James Fisher-Harris, Isa Yeo, obviously Viliami Kikau, he's getting tackle busts and run meters everywhere. You know, Liam Martin's being put through a gap, so he's getting line breaks and run meters. But the Melbourne Storm against the Canberra Raiders, they showed that, if you want to roll your sleeves up and go set for set, grind it out with the Melbourne Storm, that's obviously what they do best. That's ingrained. And I have a theory, a belief that a lot of the skill of like a Jesse Bromwich or a Tohu Harris is in what they do defensively, in the sense that they are big and mobile. So you think about the wrestle of the Storm, you think, okay, you got to be big enough to make good contact, you got to win the contact, but also you got to be big enough and skillful enough in their system to wrap up the ball carrier, wrestle the ball carrier onto their back. Like, that is defensive skill. That is talent for defense. And that's, I think, Jesse Bromwich, Tohu Harris, they have that kind of ability. So I think that's one thing that makes them so good. But it's just what they do with the footy. And if you want to go grind for grind, set for set, you can do that. But the Melbourne Storm have consistently shown that they can dictate the game by shifting the footy to the sidelines and kind of bypassing the middle forwards. How every other team uses their middle forward is just like tough carry, tough carry, tough carry, get us a quick play the ball. Whereas the Melbourne Storm, you got to do your basic job, but the likes of Jesse Bromwich, Christian Welch, they're trying to shift the footy in conjunction with the game plan, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Like, it's not just about what you can do individually. It's about what you can do to make the team the most highly functioning unit they can possibly be, I suppose. Like, I mean, what the Storm did in the first 25 minutes of that game against the Raiders, like, blew my mind. Like, they were so good, and they came out, like, so, like, just everything was clicking. They knew exactly what they were doing. Like, it just felt like everything they touched turned to gold kind of thing, except for they were 24-0 up after 25 minutes. They should have been 30-0 up, because there was that Adokar try where he sort of shafted it. Like, they could have had 5 tries in that time. It was unbelievable. And then they lost on the scoreboard for the rest of the game, but I mean, it never felt like that. It never felt like the Raiders were anything other than at least 2 more tries additionally away from threatening a comeback. It was the Storm had it in control, and it was like they came out and blitzed them at the start. Everything was working, and then they just controlled the game the rest of the way. And both of those things, like, you got to have a fully functioning forward pack across the board to be able to do, like, both sides of that game plan. Like, the stuff that, even though it's the rapid backline fellas that are getting the stats, the line breaks, the tries, the try assists. It's the the forwards is laying that platform, not just laying the platform, like they're involved, they're up there running and supporting all that, and then just shutting down the Raiders defensively for the rest of the way. The Storm didn't have to score any more points. There's also that Cameron Smith tackle, wasn't there, where he folded what's his name backwards and gets that's on all the highlight reels as well. But I mean, that's one over the top moment. It's just there was the whole rest of the whole 80 minutes defensively. The Storm were pretty remarkable against what we know is a great Raiders team, and it has been the Raiders were so good the week before as well. They blew my mind that in that game, how well they played.
And that was, I guess, what I was my whole spiel that went around a few circles, what I was trying to get to was that what we saw on the field did kind of blow you away. Like, it's just watching it, I was like, holy shit. But then again, I've seen it from the Storm before. There's been games in a more modern era, like the last 5 years, where the Storm have done this. Yeah, it might be something they do target for Suncorp Stadium, because I think there was a magic round kind of game where they just blew their opponent away down the sidelines, and down the sidelines is what is the stylistic element that blows you away, because then you start thinking about how the Storm, develop a style of play over the last 15, 20 years, and you look at all the different things they can do, with the tension of their how they're perceived. Because you watch the Melbourne Storm smoke the Raiders, and if you were living under a rock and you've just heard about the Melbourne Storm, you're not necessarily thinking the Melbourne Storm are going to do that. But they have done it, and they do it. And that's kind of further to the All Blacks spiel that we did in the Patreon episode of the podcast. Goes back to what we're saying about the All Blacks. Like, the Melbourne Storm, if they do what they want to do, I think it's very hard for opposition teams to keep up, let alone defeat them. The challenge for the Penrith Panthers is to find the balance maybe between, how do we stop the Melbourne Storm doing what they want to do versus how do we just do what we want to do the best that we can do it. And it was a finals game of footy, and just some of the skill, Kenny Bromwich never puts up good stats, right? Again, this is something that I'm kind of grappling with in my mind, is trying to figure out, what are these dudes doing? And trying to offer that insight. Kenny Bromwich is like a focal point of the attack on the left edge, because he's got great hands. He can do all the passes that you want to do as an edge forward in the Melbourne Storm system. But if it's Kenny Bromwich and you hit him with a short ball, he's going to poke through. If you give Kenny Bromwich the ball in space, he can put on some footwork, he can pick the right pass, and he can offload. But if you don't want to give the ball to Kenny Bromwich, what are you going to do? Give it to Munster instead, and he's going to do something. So it's you can't. There's so many little subtle stylistic elements of the Storm that just make them so difficult to stop. Because even if Munster gets the footy out the back of Kenny Bromwich, he might have Ryan Pappenhausen one pass wider, ready to go. But then again, coming back to the start, if you give the ball to Kenny Bromwich, he can make a play as well. And it's very interesting. It makes it quite hard to judge and assess the Storm, but just what they can do with the footy, mind-blowing was a pretty good note there. And some of it was instigated by Jerome Hughes at halfback as well. Kid from Wellington who is showing finesse. There's a certain toughness to his game that is, makes us non-professional sports people look like plebs, but just some of his classy touches and finesse is delightful as well. So, and then you start to think about the different elements of the Storm halfback, because you had Cooper Cronk, who was a bit more structured, a bit more rigid in what he did. Jerome Hughes is a nice mix of playmaking, X-factor, finesse, and pizzazz, and some of that just basic, get the ball first receiver, shovel it on. But then again, you start to think about what the Melbourne Storm do. Maybe it's not necessarily about Cameron Munster or Jerome Hughes. They're not playing one pass off the ruck either side. Munster and Hughes are a bit further out, and the props get the ball at first receiver, and then they fire a second man play out to Munster or Hughes. Or Cameron Smith might get the ball at first receiver. And that's where things get interesting. Another note to add is just the disrespect for the tackle count. Like, Melbourne Storm is shifting the footy on the third tackle with a plan to have a crack. It's not just like, oh, nothing's doing. No, they have a play to run on the third tackle to shift the footy, get it to Josh Adokar. They're kicking on the fourth tackle. Again, going back to the All Blacks are shifting the ball and they're deep in their own territory. They are surprising the opponent from the regular rotation of hit this ruck, hit that ruck, go here, do there. There's a certain uniqueness. The best thing is like the beat, and this is what Luke Thomas talks about with some of the UFC fighting. Is there's like a standard kind of heartbeat to the flow of the momentum of the fight or the game. So it's kind of like dun 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 dun, and that's just what's happening. The flow of the game just settles into a groove. But if you're Israel Adesanya and you're throwing a punch and you're splitting the metronome or the beat or whatever the fuck, I don't know. But if you're stepping outside that standard dun, 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 and you're punching in between that, it's something different. And it's so off kilter that the opponent can't really assess what's happening. They get caught. Same thing with the Melbourne Storm. Third tackle, you're expecting Jesse Bromwich to cut the ball up one pass off the ruck. Instead, Jesse Bromwich gets the ball at first receiver and he fires a pass out wide. Or Jesse Bromwich is the decoy and everything happens behind him. The All Blacks deep in their own territory. You're expecting this. They shift it wide. They make a break all the way downfield. It's just something that all these high-level sports athletes and teams have in common that's just come to my mind, is just that ability to... It's kind of outlandish, to be honest. It's kind of outlandish because in sports, everyone just settles into this is how it's done. Everyone just settles into this is the flow. This is the tempo. This is just how it is. But these best teams, these best athletes, they can kind of see that that's happening and just split it. So something happens when you're least expecting it because you've been drilled into this flow that isn't necessarily applicable when you're fighting Israel Adesanya, when you're playing the Melbourne Storm, or when you're playing the All Blacks.
I have a question for you about Brandon Smith that I will chuck your way before we talk about the actual grand final and like thoughts and matchups and whatever. So Cameron Smith at the old the Delhi Messengers last night, he sweeps up the old what do you call it, the Hooker of the Year award. He's probably got about 10 of them in his on his mantelpiece, but he scoops up another one of those. Harry Grant, who is a dummy half from the Storm system, who is on loan at the Tigers, I think is how it works. He wins the Rookie of the Year. Brandon Smith is clearly an excellent player, probably the starting dummy half for the Kiwis when it comes to international stuff. What happens next year? Like, I mean, there's a chance that Cameron Smith plays on, I think most people are leaning at this point towards it. This will probably be his last game. He just hasn't announced it publicly, doesn't want to be that guy, so fair enough. Everyone's got a different sort of way on how they want to bow out. Would be no better way than to do so with a championship. Exactly what his mate Cooper Cronk did as well, wouldn't it? So let's assume that Cameron Smith does retire. If he doesn't, then who knows? Like, it's just this season again, like it's status quo. But if he does retire, Harry Grant comes back to the Storm. You got Brandon Smith there as well. Like, what happens with that? Because presumably they both want to be starting dummy halves. Harry Grant has been and did fantastic at it. Brandon Smith has been more playing as like a utility forward or a second dummy half type guy off the bench. Like, what happens next season if Smith retires? Cameron Smith, that is.
So first on the Cameron Smith retiring, like obviously there a little activity they did, little team building activity after the win against the Raiders. I believe Cameron Smith, Craig Bellamy, and maybe like a Frank Panisi, who is he's the big boss man at the Melbourne Storm, probably the best at what he does in the NRL. I think they're all taking the piss. Like, so Craig Bellamy, like so everyone except for Cameron Smith in the Melbourne Storm bubble, they say they have no idea what's happening. That might be true. But I also think that Cameron Smith and Craig Bellamy are very aware of the narrative around what's happening, and they might just be fucking with the media. Like, that would be great. Like, they're all hunting for it. They're all hounding the situation. So I think, I just think they're kind of, like, why else do you do what you do at Suncorp Stadium? Like, Craig Bellamy's reasoning was that he didn't know, and so he thought it might just be a great moment for Cameron Smith, if he does retire, to have, a last moment at Suncorp Stadium. Fair play. Like, that might be true. But also, the whole stunt could have just been organized to take the piss. So just keep that in mind. I think Cameron Smith could play on, to be honest. And I think it's kind of undeniable at this stage that he's the greatest rugby league player ever. Just what he's done. Obviously, who knows, like, we're pretty young, so fuck knows what was happening in 1950 or 1960. But, like, comparing to, the Thurstons, the Andrew Johns, even going back before that, Wally Lewis types, the Mal Meningas and all of that. Cameron Smith, I think's the best out of all of them. If you want to ask why, it's just his control of a game. So if you're controlling the game to the best that anyone's done it, and there's been moments where Cameron Smith looks as though he is in slow motion in a game of Origin, which is mental. If you can do that and win, that's pretty good, right? That's pretty good. Now, if you can do that and win over 15 years, that's a whole different kettle of fish, and that's what Cameron Smith is. With regards to Harry Grant, Brandon Smith, holy cow, I don't know. Maybe a factor here. There's been a couple of videos floating around of Brandon Smith, like he stole a lollipop from Craig Bellamy's grandson, and it was caught on video from like the Melbourne Storm. Like they're walking, the kid's just standing there sucking on a lollipop, and Brandon Smith literally just pulls the lollipop out of his mitts and walks off. It's pretty funny. Then there's another video of Craig Bellamy's like under a car fixing a tire, and Brandon Smith just walks up and just starts abusing him. Like, all good fun, but he's, taking the piss out of Bellamy, like, do you even know how to fucking change a tire? All that shit. There is a idea that one of them will leave the Melbourne Storm, right? Because if Cameron Smith plays on, one of them could serve as a deputy for another year or two. If Cameron Smith leaves, one of them will take the starting job. So one of them's going to stay, I reckon. For Brandon Smith, I reckon I just can't see him not, like, not playing for the Melbourne Storm and under Craig Bellamy. So I think if Cameron Smith plays on, Harry Grant will be the one who leaves, and Cameron Smith will play on. Brandon Smith will stay in his middle forward role, and then when it's time to move on, that's when Brandon Smith goes into the hooker role. To me, that seems the most likely, or it just becomes who the Melbourne Storm want to keep as a hooker between Harry Grant and Brandon Smith, and that's a tough one. Obviously, I'm going to favor Brandon Smith the whole way. Like, everyone's talking about Harry Grant as an amazing dummy half. The Kiwis have become a competitive team after the debacle of the 2017 World Cup on the back of Brandon Smith. Like, it's Brandon Smith who breaks the game open against Tonga a few times. It's Brandon Smith who just comes with this frantic, crazy energy. It's Brandon Smith at hooker doing his thing, amongst other factors. But when I think of Kiwi's resurgence, I think of Brandon Smith. And that's all been done at hooker. And the Melbourne Storm are the smartest operators, so they're not going to... Like, they recruited Brandon Smith as a hooker. They've seen Brandon Smith settle in as an international hooker alongside Kiwi teammates Jesse Bromwich, Kenny Bromwich, Nelson Asafa-Solomona. So they all know that he's a really good hooker as well. What I think gets lost by the Australian media is that they overlook Brandon Smith at hooker a wee bit. Whereas, to me, Brandon Smith is an amazing hooker, and it's even more amazing that he is so good at rugby league, he could be a starting NRL hooker, but he's also a unique middle forward in a grand final team. So it's just I don't know, it's all a bit weird. Like, West Tigers don't have a whole lot of hooking options to the quality of Harry Grant. So it's better suited for Harry Grant to go to hooker at the Tigers. Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, I just want Brandon Smith to stay at the Melbourne Storm. And if he does, I know the Melbourne Storm will do right by Brandon Smith, which will probably mean Brandon Smith plays hooker in the near future. The Melbourne Storm aren't going to keep Brandon Smith and just change him into a middle forward for the rest of his career. No, they know what he can do at hooker. They know he's an elite hooker, but he's also a freak who can do another job. So it's I don't know. It's a weird old situation. But again, it's a classic Melbourne Storm situation because 3 of the best hookers in the world are from the Melbourne Storm, which is pretty weird, pretty crazy. As far as the grand final goes, Wildcard, who you got? Who you got? We're recording this before team lists are unleashed. But I think if there's a team to stop the flow of momentum and energy that the Penrith Panthers have, they did get their test against the Rabbitohs. Like, that was the game that I was looking for the Panthers. They rose above that. They got into just an effort slog with the Rabbitohs, as you would expect from a Wayne Bennett team. They handled that business. Fair play to them. If there's a team that can stop the Panthers in their place with what they're doing this season, I think it's the Storm.
I agree, but I also will say if there's a team that can handle what the Storm came out and did to the Raiders in that semi-final, it's also the Panthers. I think there's a really quite a fascinating little matchup there where I think each one of these teams has areas of the game where they will feel like they can get an advantage, and so it's just a matter of who actually does. And my general feeling whenever it comes down to this kind of thing in all kind of sports, when it's when Tom Brady's in the Super Bowl with the New England Patriots, you can't really pick against him. Like when Pat Mahomes was in the Super Bowl last year, it's the highly functioning offense in the league with the best quarterback. against an extremely well-coached team in the 49ers, like a very good team, very much deserved to be where they were, but you can't really pick against like the dude who was at that point the reigning MVP, Lamar Jackson winning it last year in that season, but season before was Mahomes, right? So, and it's the Storm are the closest thing to the New England Patriots if you're comparing them. Like, I mean, even just something you were saying just before about like the progression with Cameron Smith potentially into Brandon Smith, like the Melbourne Storm had Billy Slater. I mean, we'll even forget about the Greg Inglis part of this because obvious salary cap implications, but they had Billy Slater, Cooper Cronk, Cameron Smith for like more than a decade there. Borderline greatest spine in the history of the game. Like, it probably is. Like, it's probably not even really much of an argument. And the fact that like 2 out of 3 of them are no longer there, and yet they're still making grand finals is unbelievable. Like, I think I heard somewhere like Cameron Munster is, apart from his first season where he played 1 game, he's made a preliminary final in like every season he's played, I think, as an NRL star, something like that, like something ridiculous. And there was that stat about how Cooper Cronk in his entire career played in more grand finals than he missed, which, like, these unbelievable numbers when you think about those kind of like facts and figures. The fact that the Storm have rolled through Billy Slater retiring, Cooper Cronk leaving and then retiring, Cameron Smith might not retire or he might retire. We don't know. Like, there's certainly no doubt he could continue to play at a high level if he wants to. Just up to him, really. A lifestyle option, I suppose, at this point. Like, the fact they've rolled through that, through 2 out of 3 of that spine leaving, and that they're still such a strong team is unbelievable. And it's reasons like that why I couldn't bring myself to pick against them in a grand final. But I will say that, like, I think this is going to be pretty competitive. I don't see the Storm coming out and doing what they did to the Raiders there and catching Penrith off guard. And Penrith have been the best team throughout this season. They very much earned their, like, they knocked the defending champs out earlier. They just, as you said, came through a very, very tough test against an informed Rabbitohs team who were borderline. I mean, you could argue the Rabbitohs were the form team in the competition coming into the finals, and through the finals with some of their results as well. So, like, the Panthers aren't here by fluke. They very much deserve to be here. They'll see quite a lot of reasons through this matchup why they think they can compete and win this grand final. But just me personally, I always find it hard to pick against the legacy teams who have been there before, who know how to win these kind of games. So I'm definitely going to have to lean towards the old Melly Storm there, mate.
The old Melly Storm. I think there are some similarities to last year's grand final because you have the legacy team club. I don't think the Roosters are quite at the level of the Melbourne Storm, but it's a similar vibe where you had the Roosters who, well, they were still going back to back, since 2010. They've been in a pretty good spot. They are the closest thing to the Melbourne Storm in the NRL. And the Canberra Raiders, last year, it takes a couple years to build into the top 8. So if you're a Warriors fan, just listening to some rugby league chat, you have to view the Warriors' objective as making the top 8 next season. You're not thinking top 4. You're not thinking premiership. You're thinking top 8. Once you get into the top 8 for a season, what are you going to do from there? You're going to try and stay in the top 8, and you're trying to go further. So Canberra Raiders last year, they'd been on the scene for a couple of years. Ricky Stewart comes in, everything's simmering away, and then, after 3 or 4 years, they make the grand final. They're the team playing the up-tempo, throw it around, funky footy. They're a bit rugged, they're tough. They're just a really good footy team. This year, you've got the Melbourne Storm, who are the Roosters, and you've got the Panthers, who are the Raiders. So you've got a legacy club, a legacy team, as you put it, and then you've got the hottest team. So I think it's a similar scenario to last year, and it just depends whether you want the hot team Panthers can attack from anywhere. They're classy. They have so much variety. They've got the right toughness. They're fizzing. They're just fizzing on all levels. They're ready to go. They love each other's company. Some great little bits of information coming out of the Panthers on this run to the grand final. So check out all that coverage around the interwebs. But they're just like, they're the team of 2020. And they're coming up against the team of our lifetime, right? Like, it's like you've got, like Patrick Mahomes coming up against the New England Patriots or that kind of example. So it is tough. It's tough to go against like what we've seen for the last 15 years. We've watched the Melbourne Storm deal with this exact situation most seasons, and it's just hard to go against that. Like, no matter really like how good the Penrith Panthers are or have been, I think for most people, they have seen what the Melbourne Storm do. They know all about it. They've learned all about it. And it still applies. It still applies here, 2020, in October, this weekend. And what you're saying about the Melbourne Storm, just to wrap this up, Wildcard, about how the Melbourne Storm have just constantly re-upped. They've constantly pivoted. They've constantly developed and got better and added something new and replaced players. Like, we're talking every level of your roster, the Melbourne Storm know how to plug a gap. With everyone knows the stories about some no-name Jacko getting signed by the Melbourne Storm, and he does his job in that team, and he goes to a grand final, whatever it is. So now, what's their twist on the hooker situation? I think it's a very interesting little space to leave this, because you've got the team, the club, regardless of the grand final. Let's put the grand final out of the picture for a second. You've got the team, the club, who have shown that they are the best at refreshing their roster. They are the best at rolling with the ups and downs of building a roster. So what's that team? The best at doing this. What are they going to do with Brandon Smith and Harry Grant? So you were asking me what I thought, and that's the context that everyone's viewing this in. It's about, what do you think's going to happen with Harry Grant? What do you think's going to happen with Cameron Smith? What do you think's going to happen with Brandon Smith? For me, I'm more interested in what the Melbourne Storm are thinking and doing, because they're the club, they're the team who has shown over 15, 20 years. This is how you build a roster. This is how you deal with players leaving, players wanting more money. This is how you deal with junior recruitment, junior development. This is how you deal with getting the best value out of a player. And I'm just interested in what that club is going to do with this very unique situation with Cameron Smith and the two younger hookers as well. But we might wrap it up there, Wildcard. So you're going with the Storm for the grand final?
Yeah, gotta go with the Storm, I think. But I also try to I don't try to commit to grand final predictions just in case, because I want to be able to nestle into the flow of the game and how it goes, because I do, like I said, I do think this will be a pretty fascinating matchup in a few different areas, so bring it on, basically.
It's not quite Joseph Tapine versus Nelson Asafa-Solomona, because they're both from Wellington, and that's a little unique matchup, but Fisher-Harris versus Asafa-Solomona, Fisher-Harris versus Jesse Bromwich, that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for. 2020. What a glorious year it has been. Another glorious episode of the Niche Cast. Stay tuned. Plenty of good Kiwi sports content coming at you. All angles. Check your peripheral vision, because you never know when or where the Kiwi sports content is coming at you. Kia kaha, stay beautiful, and cheer cheer.